We'll go ahead and get started. He should be here just in a minute. So the first thing, we just call a meeting to order and review the minutes from the last meeting. Anybody see anything wrong or need any additions, corrections, or? If not, do we have a motion to accept? All right, Miss Debbie makes it. I have a second. Mr. Royce. All right, according to our attorney, we need to put a discussion item C. We need to put it down as discuss the building inspector. We add that to the agenda tonight. Want to have a motion to do that? Okay, second. Okay, Ms. Steph. Did you get that, Marianne, Linda, and Dave? Well, no, Stephanie. Yeah, yeah. We'll go ahead and open up discussion on A to approve the budget by resolution instead of 3 readings. Anybody have any discussion on it? Want to add in, talk about it or whatever? All right, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'll back up a little bit. I had some discussion at the end of last week with the Comptroller's office. Since this was recommended to us to look at it, we've had a changeover in staff that oversaw the Trousdale County, or Hartsville-Trousdale County. And we have, since then, we adopted a new budgeting statute or budgeting law from under the state. Those 2 things, I think, kind of address their issues. And right now, and in talking to them, they don't really, the feeling I got is if we want to do it, fine. If we don't, they don't really care. I hate to put it that way, but it just didn't seem like they were too invested in it.
Does anybody have anything to say on that? According to the mayor, we can just leave it like it is. I mean, there's nothing really pressing to make us do it or not do it. So, Mr. Jewell.
I think it would be a really hard sell to the public to make them understand why you need to change it. So I have to agree with the mayor that I think and most of the commission, when we talk about it, they feel like we need to try to leave it alone and only bring things to charter revision. Absolutely.
Anyone else have anything to say on it or opinion on it? Or
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one more thing. Also, at the end of September, we were informed that we are receiving a, for lack of a better thing, it's called a budget certificate from the Comptroller's office. We're one of only 35 counties or metropolitan governments in the state that received this. And you have to meet some requirements. Basically, you adopted your budget on or before the end of the fiscal year. Budget was filed with their office within 15 days of adoption. They found no issues or concerns when they were reviewing your budget, and you're not currently under the oversight of any wastewater financing board or utility management review board. So we did get that certificate from the Comptroller's office. I don't know if we've ever received it before, but like I said, we're one of only 35 counties or metropolitan governments in the state that received that.
does anyone have anything to say on it or any questions about it, or do we want to go ahead and make a motion to approve it? Or Mr. Gully?
I guess I'm gonna make the motion to let it stand as is.
We've got a motion for it to stay as it is. Do we have a second? Mr. Gully makes a second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? The motion carries. And the next item we're going to discuss is fire department. it was compensation for them. I think everybody's got the copy where it's highlighted on the way it's done now. Mr. Beller, would you want to speak on this for the changes that you think should be made on that? Yes.
Mr. Chair, now I'm going to defer to Chairman Jewell. He was the author of some of those changes that he and I have discussed it, but I would defer to him, and then I can make commentary after he brings forth why that he recommends the changes to this body. If that's okay with you.
All right, Mr. Jewell.
Thank you. This has been bounced around for some time. The mayor and I have had several conversations about it, and the charter, as you're looking at it there in 406, the first paragraph is the way it reads now. The yellowed in is what we were proposing to change it to. We wanted to get away from the term salaries because a lot of the fire department right now is paid stipend, or sometimes they may be paid hourly, they may be paid something other than salary. So that was one of the main changes that we wanted to make, and we felt like the word compensation would encompass all of those things. Also, it refers to, in the very last sentence, that salaries for employed personnel therefore selected in accordance with the governing bylaws of such department. In doing research on this with CTAS and MTAS, volunteer fire departments that are solely independent and funded themselves typically operate under bylaws. Fire departments that are under a governmental entity, be it municipal or county, typically work under the county personnel policies, things of that nature. So what we were trying to do is strike out the part that says governing bylaws of the department and let that department be like all the other departments and operate under the personnel policies of the county. And Mr. Beller felt that the last phrase, therefore in accordance with adopted personnel policies of Hartsville-Charleston County government, was redundant, that your personnel policies are going to address who is involved in that. So what our suggestion is now is to take that second paragraph, and it would read, the commission is empowered to give financial support to such fire departments providing for capital improvements and equipment needed by such department and compensation for employed personnel, and end it right there. So that's what the change would be basically 4 words, compensation for employed personnel, and deleting the rest of that last sentence. There has been some confusion at times what applied, the bylaws that were written years ago before the fire department was a department of the government, and some things like that. And it's not an attempt to take over the fire department or anything like that. It's to clean up the language and make it a lot simpler for everyone to understand what set of rules we're playing by universally for the county. That's the rationale behind it. That's the reasoning behind it. And would just like to see it put forth to the public and see if they agree with it. Any questions?
So, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Jewell? All right, Ms. Debbie.
Yes, Debbie.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Ms. Jenkins.
Okay, I have a question regarding the volunteers who participate and take care of us when we need them. We're changing this to say compensation for employed personnel. We're leaving the old way of doing things where they get paid per diem or per call. how will they be compensated now? Because they certainly need to be compensated.
That is addressed in the personnel policy. We're in the process of revising it, but it does cover all classifications of employees and the way they're paid, paid now. There's no anticipated changes to that part of it. Is there, Mayor? Anything you recall?
No, I think the only thing we changed or were recommended to change, it's in front of the Personnel Committee, would be the language conflicted with the charter, because the charter specifically mentions governing bylaws, and the personnel policy had different language in there, so they were conflicting. So we're suggesting make it comply with the charter. But as far as compensation for the fire department employees, it's currently paid by call, and we're not recommended to change that going forward.
We just felt that the word compensation would cover everything, whether it was a stipend or it was hourly or it was salary or whatever you need going into the future. And salary is a bit of a misnomer. A salaried employee truly gets an amount of money whether they show up to work or not. So that was the reasoning behind that part of it. But the question of the bylaws being a part of the charter and a department of government operating under bylaws has created some confusion.
My concern was we're addressing it now as compensation for employed personnel. Will that be separated and there'll be continued to be volunteers? Is that how that's going to work? And I believe you said that maybe you're doing that in your personnel policy.
Yeah, on the personnel policy, the section addressing the fire department is currently under a section entitled volunteer employees. And it provides by per call and training events what we're suggesting. So right now there'd be no change to that. Now, that's not to say that can't change going forward. And if you change the language in this, you wouldn't have to, if you change the language in the charter by referendum, you don't have to come back and change the charter to go from, let's say, volunteers to a paid department. But currently it's still volunteer and it's paid by call and training event.
We really ran into this in going over the personnel policy and trying to incorporate the new language and trying to make it marry the charter and state law and federal law and all these things. And we know that there's a lot of terminology that was outdated, antiquated, that 50 years ago meant one thing and it means something else now. And so we're just trying to look at those words because we do know that words are important. But that's the rationale. That's the reason for doing it. Public may not go along with it. I don't know. I think they will when they understand the why. But there's nothing nefarious behind it. It's just to try to clean up the language.
Is there any other questions? Need any more clarification or? Mr. Beller, do you have anything to add?
Just one thing to keep in mind, that the entirety of the section that you're altering deals with section 4.06, which is the minimum requirements that you have for departments and departmental functions. So it's the bare minimum of what you've got to have. So you're not, by changing that language, you're really not taking anything away from it. But as Chairman Jewell and Mayor Chambers have both pointed out, it does make it more consistent with the personnel policies that we're working on now. There's just been, quite frankly, a monumental undertaking in order to be consistent across the board. The proposed language, it makes sense to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Beller. Any other questions? Mr. Woodard, your chief, do you have anything to say on this or? Okay. Mr. Gully.
We keep discussing a new employee handbook, but we have not adopted any new employee handbook or employee personnel policies at this point. unless I've missed something.
No, just there is some proposed language in there that would add that you go by the governing bylaws because the current one does not comply with the charter. But the personnel policy currently does provide for pay for training events and calls and that whatnot. So the only thing we're proposing, the mayor's office is proposing, it was to put language in there saying that they're, I guess, how does it put it? Basically that the volunteer firefighters are, I guess, picked, or I can't remember the exact terminology we use, but as far as their employment is dictated by the governing bylaws, which is what the charter says. So we were cleaning up that difference in language between the personnel policy and the charter. But if you change the charter, well, then you just strike that part out. And that was really the only change that we proposed to the section on the volunteer fire department, was that everything else pretty much stayed the same, I believe. But again, that's in front of the personnel committee, and that's up to them if it gets through or not. But like I said, the only change that was in there that was proposed was to make it comply with the current language of the charter.
Mr. Beller?
And Commissioner Gully, keep in mind, there's going to be a time lag because this body is just going to make the recommendation of the commission, and it's the commission obviously will have to make that decision before it goes to voter electorate. So there's an anticipation here that at some point that the personnel policy committee will make the recommendations at the same time, or similar to. Obviously, I don't think we're going to get to it by the end of the year. That would almost seem like an impossible task given the volume of work that still needs to be done. But it's something that in anticipation of what needs to be done, and maybe underlying an assumption, but then again, it's still going to take 2/3 of the votes of the county commission in order to make that recommendation, sir. So just it's the time lags also involved.
I think that would be determined by what language you put in, the specific language you put in the referendum that goes to the voters. So, I mean, what you're going to do is if you recommended it'll go to the county commission, I think that's where it requires 2/3 majority to be submitted to the voters for the referendum. But it does have to, if that's going to happen, I believe April's the deadline to have it to the county election commission to be put on the ballot.
Just to be clear, I was not referencing, and I appreciate the time, piece of conversation, but I'm referencing the fact that we're having a conversation about something that we're going to meet that's not yet even put in play, is what I was saying. We're referencing something that's not even in play, a policy that's not there yet, is all I'm saying in the conversation. I understand that there's going to be some time constraints here in those pieces.
Any more questions, discussion? From what I'm looking at and the way I understand it, it's just that it'll be in the personnel policy as this change, but it's not, well, like I said, it got till April to do it before it goes to vote. And I think personnel should have all of that concluded by then, I would think.
This is the charter revision amendment. It has nothing to do with personnel policy. Whether it stays the same or it changes, all this is doing is saying that the department is going to take the word salary and change it to compensation. And by taking the word bylaws out of it, my inference is you're going to operate under the personnel policy of the county, like any other department. Policy that's in place now, or the policy that will be adopted at a later date.
So what it's saying, the bylaws that the fire department has now will do away with those, and it'd be under personnel policy rules. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor?
I'm sorry, I was trying to find the current version of the policy. Can you repeat that, Mr. Chairman?
The way that we're discussing this, it'll be under, take away the bylaws that the fire department has that they go by, and everything will be conducted by personnel policy.
That would be the effect of the proposed change. Yes, sir.
Is everybody clear on that and understand, or have any questions about that? Are you ready to make a motion or more discussions, or?
If I could go back and address the personnel policy issue. Right now, the current policy says volunteer firefighters are appointed by the fire chief when necessary. Well, obviously, that complies with the charter, which specifically says employed personnel thereof selected in accordance with the governing bylaws of such department. That's what we submitted in our proposed change to the charter, was language saying that the volunteer firefighters are selected in accordance with the governing bylaws. So we're actually proposing to change the personnel policy to meet this language of the charter. But if that changes, goes to referendum and goes change, well, then personnel policy would need to be changed as well.
Everyone understand that?
Well, assuming that that change was approved by the county commissioner, I'm just saying, we put language, we're proposing language to change the current personnel policy to fit the charter, which provides it's done by governing bylaws. If you take that out, well, then there's no reason to put that in the personnel policy because you've changed. And if that's approved by the voter, then that language is no longer in the charter. I know I might be confusing somebody, and I'm willing to answer any questions on that.
So, one of the things you said, Mr. Jewell, was that most departments, volunteer departments that are governed by, according to MTS, CTS and all that, that are governed by the government, taken care of by the government, they're paid, you know, whatever, that they would typically follow under their personnel policies. Correct.
Or your department, you have departmental rules.
Right.
I put my glasses on to see the button. I've fussed at everybody else doing that, and then I get up here and do it. I want to make sure I understood what you're asking, Shaq.
So volunteer departments that create their own income.
Right,
typically
independent agents.
would typically create their own rules and regulations, bylaws.
Yes, they
whatnot.
operate under bylaws.
So, and then departments that are taken care of by their county government typically would follow under their personnel policy, their rules,
Right.
and things like that. That's, I'm just.
I'm sure there's exceptions.
Right.
We're an exception right now.
Right.
But I think as a general rule, from everything that CTAS, MTAS could find, now you do have independent fire districts within a county that the county will subsidize them. They will give them money, but they're still independent agencies. You know, our fire department is not that. It's not that. Now, within the department, you're still going to have departmental rules that will dictate how much training, things like that, with the mayor, in conjunction with the mayor, as far as in budget process, what you're going to get paid or how you're going to get paid or any of those things. And none of that is proposed to be changed, other than just trying to get away from that document that was written, we don't even know when. You know, and to try to align this department like any of the other departments of government. I mean, we don't have any other departments that operate under bylaws. You know, I mean, you know, they can operate to a degree under their rules, but not a set of bylaws. It's kind of antiquated way of doing things that time has gotten away from, because you went from independent fire districts, a bunch of downtown merchants putting together a fire department and, you know, and having fundraisers and selling cakes to fund the fire department and all that sort of thing, to where it's more of a governmental entity now. So I don't think this is not going to change the complexion of the department and what's going on. It puts that away from a paper that was promulgated many, many years ago to what the chief, assistant chiefs, mayor decides is best for the department, which is really what's happening now. It's just causing confusion when we were going through this personnel policy, trying to put bylaws in, and why are we doing that when we don't really need that? So I hope that answered your question. Anybody else have another question? Did that begat? Sometimes begats, this begats that, begats that. Okay.
Any more questions, any more discussion? Do I hear a motion to accept it this way and send it on?
I'll make the motion.
All right, we have a motion by Shaq. You have a second? Mr. Royce makes a second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? The motion carries. The next thing we're going to discuss, we added a C, discussion of building inspector. We added that because Mr. Beller thinks we need to discuss it tonight before we take any action on it. Do you want to speak on it, Mr. Beller, or you just?
I'll be happy to frame the issue and then we can discuss a little bit about it, but this is not an action item for tonight. It's just something for a thought process for our next meeting, because I certainly would like to have proposed language in front of you for your consideration, as opposed to just me telling you what is certainly, I think after, probably the best thing to do would be consulting CTAS and MTAS as well. Maybe get some recommendations from them. But if you look in under page 11 of the charter that you have again, we're back on 4.06 minimum requirements. And if you'll scroll down to paragraph F, which is at the bottom, and I'll just read that. Public Works Department, which shall be administered by the mayor or such persons as the mayor may appoint, subject to confirmation by the commission, and shall administer the building code and zoning enforcement, including building code inspection and reports and certifications, all engineering functions, building rehabilitation programs, parks and recreations, and the sanitation and garbage collections. That's all under the penumbra, or the umbrella, if you will, of Public Works. And I certainly want the mayor to weigh in as needed in this. We have a building code inspector. Many of you may know him, Sam Edwards. Yeah, and there's a question with regard to this language about, well, in what line of authority is Mr. Edwards under? Is he under Mr. Slee, or is he under the mayor? I can read some of this in different ways. It is a little bit, as they say, the language is a little bit blind, maybe confusing a bit, and it may serve well to have it clarified a little bit. Suffice it to say, Sam Edwards is responsible to the mayor. It doesn't take we're not asking for any type of recommendation that would be a change in his authority for the office of the mayor for the purposes of a building inspector. But it does it is a little bit confusing when it comes to whether or not you read this, that whether the head of the Public Works Department, who would be the mayor, but his delegee would have the, or designee would have the authority to control the work, supervise the work, hire, fire, the building inspector. And I can see where some of these other functions that are, maybe we don't readily use, engineering functions, building rehab, we don't have an on-staff engineer to my knowledge, Mayor, do we?
We do not, though, as part of the American Rescue Fund, I'm seriously considering asking the county commission that we retain a general engineering firm because there's some projects in there we're probably going to need it. But as far as an engineering department, like say City of Lebanon does or Gallatin, we do not have that.
And I'm certain when this was designed, it was designed for that purpose, to be broad enough to include those categories, to expand as needed, particularly as need arises in population growth. I just the language could use some cleaning up, and obviously I'd be any thought processes anyone has. So I want to bring that up tonight. It's been discussed before, as far back as me being county attorney. I can remember having discussions on this particular section. So with that being said, is there any questions or any commentary? And otherwise, Mayor, Chairman Jewell, Chairman Clarity, I'd certainly weigh in with regard to your concerns with regard to that section as well.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Beller? Ms. Debbie?
Couple of questions. Have you given any thought to what kind of title you would put to this department for that?
I raised that very question before the meeting tonight, so yes, I have.
Okay, and to better understand what the goal is here to accomplish, we would kind of need to know exactly how broad his duties are. What is his job description?
Well, that's almost I want to almost say that's a wage study question that might have a little carryover into that, but you are correct. Now, keep in mind, we're dealing with the charter here. So some of those descriptives, I would never recommend putting that in the charter. But I don't think that's, but as a follow through to that, that's something that could be considered. I don't know that we have job descriptions for every employee, Mayor, do we?
We do. They were actually part of the compensation study. The group went back and created a job description for each position. And I'm actually trying to get in my Google Drive and bring it up so I can answer your question, but my mouse is dead, so I'm having to do it by touch screen, and it's not always very responsive.
And I do have a third thing that's come to mind. Back in 2001, after the vote and we became a metropolitan government, part of the duties that the county executive had at that time was to do an organizational chart as to who answered to whom and under what departments. That's been a long time ago. It's been 20 years ago. So I don't remember how in depth that got, but your concern may be addressed by that particular organizational chart. It may be broken out and it falls under the direction of the county executive or mayor.
Correct. And again, though, your charter's not very clear on that as it needs to be. That's one of the issues. So I agree with what you're saying. You know, obviously the organizational flow charts, those chain of command, if you will, those are something that lay within the purview of the mayor's office.
Well, now those are on the minutes of the county commission. We had, that was part of this organization in getting this government set up. There were several ordinances that had to be put into place for us to function, and that was one of them. And that chart should be on the minutes. So however that chart is set up, if it's addressed, then it's a matter of record. So you know, there may be a need to do this, there may not be.
Okay. And it's a discussion item. It was brought to my attention. Certainly, having you said that, then I will delve deeper into getting that organizational chart. You said it was done back in 2001?
It should be 2001, okay. Yes. And it could have been just prior to, I think, as I recall, we probably had to have some called meetings once that thing passed. to get us set to be up and running. So it could be in the December or November minutes of 2000.
December, November of 2000.
Mhm.
Okay. Very good. I will certainly look at that. Anyone else?
I have one other question of interest. Will this be any burden for Public Works with considering salary or their budget?
Hey, could you repeat that question, please?
Would this change have effect on the Public Works budget? Not a,
No.
thank you.
It shouldn't. It's,
No, I think currently and he's want to change one of the proposals going forward, we're looking at some code sections is to change it from building inspector to building official, because that meets with the International Residential Code. They refer to that office as building official. But no, currently it's in a separate part of the budget. It's under planning. And I do have a little bit of the job description. If you don't mind, I'll just read the summary. It says, this position operates and directs the building, zoning, planning, and codes enforcement department, performs technical field inspections and investigative work in enforcement of the adopted zoning, building, plumbing, mechanical, fire, and property maintenance code to ensure the safety and general welfare of residents and to maintain safety and property values of all structures in Hartsville-Trousdale County. And it has 15 different duties that are on here. So we do have a job description, and I agree with Mr. Beller. I think this is going to take a lot more than just general discussion. This is just bringing the idea up initially, and we'd be more than happy to share this job description and answer any other questions that the committee has, as commission has. And I did see probably about 2 weeks ago, I was in the records going back and looked, and I went back to the organizational documents when they did that. I believe it's in November or December, like you said, of 2000. That they did that, and I do have a copy of the organizational chart. I can't make a copy of that because I doodled on it, made some little notes and stuff, but so I can go back and provide that to you and Mr. Beller as well. I don't know that I made a copy of that electronically, but I can go back and look at my records. Again, I would try to find it on here, but like I said, my mouse is dead and it's not being very responsive right now.
Anyone else have any discussion or questions? Basically, what this is going to do is going to move the building inspector out from under Public Works. It'll be a department of its own. It's always been under Public Works. It'll be moved out from under that, and because it operates on its own budget anyway. It don't have anything to do with Public Works budget. It's got its own budget it works with. It'll just be taking it out from under Public Works and titled to itself. Mr. Joe?
Basically what you just said is the way it's been operating. It's been operating that way as an independent department. It's just that the charter says something different than what we've been doing. And we're just trying to, there again, bring it in line with what's actually happening. They have their own separate budget. It's just when the charter doesn't say that the building official has to be appointed by the mayor and approved by the county commission, but Sam was, because that's the way we've operated, but it's not necessarily the way the charter calls it out. And there again, it's just trying to clean up some of this language and make it a little bit more consistent with actually what we're doing and need to be doing.
Basically, all we're doing tonight is just discussing to get it out, see what people think about it. And like Mr. Beller said, he's going to get more research on it and maybe try to get it next month. That's what you're thinking?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just real quick on the organizational chart, I was able to find it in my Google Drive files. And it does have the county executive, and I'll give you the departments that it has under the county executive. It's fire department, water and sewer department, public works, emergency management, metro attorney, metro auditor, park board, E911 board, equalization board. So that's all the departments it has under the mayor, according to that organizational chart that was in December 2000.
I couldn't remember if it was set out separately, but I knew there was an organizational chart, and I just wanted to refer back to that and see if it was addressed. So thank you.
and I'm reaching way back in the cobwebs here, but I really think this was structured this way in the charter, and you were on the commission, I wasn't, but I was part of it. Because this is the way it was handled in the city of Hartsville. In the city, the building inspector was under Public Works or the Public Works Commissioner. So I think that that was a carryover from the way the city operated in that department. I really think that's why we're where we are the way it is.
Any other discussions on it? Or like I said, we'll try to bring it back next month and maybe get it clarified and changed. This is just discussing tonight on how it needs to be done or what needs to be done with it. So we won't take any action at all tonight on it. Anybody have anything else they want to discuss or? Mr. Beller, what all did, you wanted to set another meeting for November the 16th at 6 p.m. Is there any certain things we needed to really discuss other than this, or do we? Okay, if anybody comes up with anything between now and then, just get a hold of me, Mr. Beller, the mayor, or somebody, and we'll put it on the agenda to discuss it. Because we're just going, like Mr. Beller said, we're just going to have to do this a little at a time. It's not going to be a big overnight thing to accomplish. He suggested that we meet once a month to discuss the stuff that anybody has any questions about and like get clarification on it and whatever to get it the way it should be read. Don't have any public comment from anyone or anybody like to say anything? I don't see any money. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Gully?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Ms. Linda got a second. All in favor? Like I said, the next meeting will be November the 16th here at 6 p.m. Thank you all.